Okay, so tonight our speaker is Henry, and he's giving us an overview, not just the Sandy Hook butterfly count, but just all the flora and fauna of Sandy Hook in general. So I'm going to invite Henry up to give the presentation. Thank you.
Let's see. Can you hear me all right? Okay. So I came here and I'm thinking to myself, most of these people are much more accomplished butterflyers than I am. So I thought for about the first half of the program, I'm just going to do some history and geology and flora and fauna and all kinds of different little facts about Sandy Hook, a little bit of the history of the area. And so for anybody who may be watching this online afterwards, you might want to skip through the first half of the program if you're not interested in the history and just want to know where to find the butterflies. Um, so first of all, no, this is fine. So Sandy Hook is what they call geologically a recurved spit. Sand travels from south to north along the New Jersey coast, and so Sandy Hook would be growing if it weren't for the fact that they dredge the New York Channel in order to get ships into New York Harbor. Eventually, Sandy Hook would, if left to its own devices, connect up to New York City. And oops, let's see here. Not moving me here. Oh, all right. We'll do it that way. Now. All right. So, and Sandy Hook has this beautiful lighthouse, which is the second oldest continuously operating lighthouse in the world. It was built in 1764, and it has been operating and has been lit every night since 1764. Even during the American Revolution, when the British held Sandy Hook, the Patriots came out with a cannon. They fired a cannonball into the lighthouse, which promptly bounced off and left a little dent in the 6-foot thick walls at the base. So the lighthouse is a pretty cool feature of Sandy Hook. Now, of course, when you talk about forts, and Sandy Hook has Fort Hancock, you have these granite walls, right? That's how they used to build forts. But Sandy Hook was being built around the time of the fortifications, I should say, were being built around the time of the Civil War. And it turns out that the power of the cannons in those days made walls like that pretty well obsolete. So they never finished it. And there's a little close up of it. That's all there is of, quote, Fort Hancock, unquote, the fort part anyway. But nevertheless, a portion of Sandy Hook was turned into a military base because it was an impressive location for guarding the port of New York. So Sandy Hook from way, way back in the 1800s was part of the guardianship of New York Harbor in case we were ever attacked by sea. So this is the parade ground, and to the left is officers' row where the officers live, and to the right, sergeants' row where the non-commissioned officers lived. This is Battery Aerosmith on the bay side. So there were gun batteries made of this reinforced concrete on both the ocean side and on the bay side of Sandy Hook. And it was kind of interesting because they covered over the concrete, most of it with sand, and allowed the natural vegetation to grow up. So it looked like dunes, and it was kind of camouflage. And so they were, they were pretty intentional about how they went about protecting the harbor. And Sandy Hook then in the 1800s became a place where they did a lot of research and it was a proving ground. And so when you go into some of the buildings, the ones that are preserved anyway, if you go in, you might notice you see the ceiling there. Um, it does not look like plaster because if you are on Sandy Hook during the time when they had the proving ground in operation, the concussion of the explosions going off constantly would cause the plaster to crack and fall down on your head. So they put up tin ceilings, and that took care of that problem. It's a lot easier and less dangerous if your walls crack a little bit and you have to, work on the plaster on your walls, but ceilings are a different story. So this is, I don't know if any of you've been out there when there's a place now called McFly's on the Hook, and it's a little lunch place and snack place. And so it's kind of nice to have something like that right on Sandy Hook because they haven't had that in the past. And so I try to give them a little business every time I go out there. And they have a beautiful, ceiling from the era of the 1800s. And incidentally, there's an interesting story in the 1880s. I forget exactly. I think it was 1883. They stopped firing projectiles down the beach for about 10 weeks, I think it was. And the reason is, I don't know if any of you've ever been down to the presidential summer house that used to be um, down south of Sandy Hook, but uh, James Garfield was shot and was taken to the House of the Seven Presidents, they call it. And so while they were trying to help him recover from his wounds, they stopped firing the shells down the beach to give him a little peace and quiet to be able to rest. So that's a little anecdote about the proving ground. Unfortunately for Garfield, he didn't make it. He was one of the presidents who were assassinated, but he did live for, I think it was 70 days roughly at the House of the Seven Presidents. Here is a picture of one of the Rodman guns, the largest one ever made. That is a huge smoothbore cannon and cast as a single piece in a sand cast, and it fires a projectile or a cannonball that weighs 1,070 pounds. They were never actually fired in any kind of a battle. They were test fired, or at least one of them was test fired. There were only two or three of these huge monsters made because, of course, being being that the technology was moving forward so fast that it was pretty much close to obsolete by the time they actually had these things ready, for use. And so they were replaced by more effective breech loading cannons that could be loaded and fired faster and more efficiently, and rifled bores that made them more accurate and so forth. But they have one of the big Rodman guns out there for you to check out when you're there. So Sandy Hook went along through the 1800s and most of the 1900s as a place of protection for the port of New York, and also places where they tested and did a lot of research and development. And in fact, when the English gave us the plans for how to make radar, they tested the radar at Sandy Hook just before they put it into use in World War II. And the final defense was these Nike missiles. The Nike Hercules is the big one, the Ajax is the little one, and then they had the radar units, which we called them golf balls before. It had the dome shaped kind of dimpled uh, radome on top of them, and they're gone now. So, but the radar unit was still there. So that was the last thing. These missiles were intended to shoot down large bombers that were, threatening the potential of dropping an atomic bomb on us. So these were the last defenses that were there. And so Sandy Hook, as a military base, was decommissioned around 1974, and the national park took it over. And so today it is the most visited national park unit. It's called Gateway National Recreation Area. It includes uh, Jones Beach, I think, in New York. So you can see why that would be one of the most visited parks. Everybody goes there for the weekend. But Sandy Hook is a part of that complex, and they have loads and loads of visitors, which is incidentally why we do the count for Sandy Hook on a Thursday, so you don't have to wait an hour in line to get on the hook on a Saturday morning. But at the same time, in the 1800s, trains had gotten to a point of being quite efficient, and there was a railroad that went down along the shore and stopped here in Highlands. This is a picture that I downloaded of a postcard from 1890 with Highlands in the foreground and a bridge that went over from Highlands to Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook on the southern end, below the places where you had military, was a thriving resort area with cottages and all kinds of whatever you would expect to find at the beach. Like you had restaurants and dancing and bars and all kinds of stuff. And so wherever you have humans, you have trash. One man's trash is another man's treasure. So all of these bottles, except maybe one, I found scuba diving at Sandy Hook. Around that bridge that we saw on the postcard there, where that bridge used to be, you can still find the old pilings, and you can kind of do some scuba diving and around there, or even at low tide, sometimes bottles will wash right up on the beach on the bayside there. The shells are not from New Jersey, but the bottles are from New Jersey. And then also you might have noticed, you see at the top there, there's a sign that says Gaetano S. Next time you are headed to Sandy Hook and you're crossing the bridge that's there today, look to the north of the bridge, and you'll see this green marker buoy here. That marks the place right in the channel where a boom trawler, similar to the one in the picture there, except the one that's underwater is painted maroon. And it was scuttled there by, well, there's a whole story about that I can tell you afterwards. But a friend of mine and I went diving on this boat in February of 1981, after the boat had gone down in 1980. And in the summer of 1981, the top of the boat, the boathouse, this part here was just a little bit above the water. And so at low tide, it would stick out, and somebody set it on fire in August of 81, and it burned to the water line. So they have the marker buoy there. Green is for hazard to navigation because this thing sits right in the channel. But it's quite a story. I can tell you the story afterwards if you're interested. Now we come to the flora and fauna part. Of course, there's lots of birds at Sandy Hook, and in particular, if you're interested in shooting pictures of the ospreys, they're all over the place out there. on top of the old buildings, on top of the nest that they set up for them. Bring your long lens for your camera, and you will almost undoubtedly get a pretty good picture of an osprey. And of course, there is other wildlife. Since Sandy Hook is sometimes an island and sometimes a peninsula, we'll have to assume that the deer snuck onto the hook across the bridge, walking along the road. But there are loads and loads of them out there. And I took a picture of this little fox. He was very unafraid of cars, so I just drove up, rolled down my window, grabbed the camera, and he stood there looking at me while I shot a couple pictures. I'm like, "Thanks, I'll see you later." And then, of course, we have up at the top there. I used to live for a little while on Sandy Hook, and one of the park rangers told me, if you're in a national park, you're supposed to have bears. So we've adopted the raccoons as Sandy Hook bears. And of course, prickly pear cactus grows all over the place out there. I have only seen that also at Island Beach State Park. I'm sure there are a few other places where it could grow, but generally doesn't, unless it's left quite alone and undisturbed. And most of our beaches are not left alone and undisturbed, but you will, if you come out on the June trip, there will be some of the cactus that's in bloom. And it's really kind of cool if you get a picture of the cactus with the flower open and a butterfly sitting in there nectaring on it. It's kind of a cool picture that way. And if you are interested in just landscape type stuff, you're 6 miles from New York City by water. So you have the Verrazano Narrows Bridge there, and right there is the light on Romer Shoals. And this is a picture that I shot from the observation deck for the birds up in the north end of Sandy Hook uh, above North Beach. You can go up to the bird observation deck that overlooks this freshwater marsh and get a nice picture of the skyline of New York City. And if you get the lighting just right, this was just not quite perfect, but if you get the lighting just right, it can be pretty spectacular. And of course, you can do some artistic type things. This was I shot a picture as the moon was coming up. I had calculated that the moon was going to be coming up right around this place and set up my camera and shot a series of pictures with the camera on a tripod, um, different settings, so you get the grass in the foreground illuminated, and did what they call an HDR mashup, and kind of plugged in the moon because the moon was just a giant bright dot in all my pictures, but I did get a picture of the moon that represents what I actually saw. So it was kind of, it's kind of a cool thing to do if you're not into butterflies. Maybe you're into taking pictures. And then sunsets at Sandy Hook can be truly spectacular because you have not only the ocean side where you have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning in the summer for sunrise, but you can hang out and get some nice sunset pictures on the bay side. And so I have had some lovely opportunities for sunset pictures. And this one is my very favorite. I shot this picture around 9 o'clock at night. I stayed after one of our butterfly days. And when the butterflies all were gone around 6, I just kind of hung out for a while. I'm like, all right, let me go set up and take some pictures of the sunset. And this is basically just how it looked. It was absolutely gorgeous. So if you're into just hanging out and getting some interesting walks or pictures or whatever, maybe you want to book a motel somewhere nearby, hang out overnight, and just enjoy all the other things at Sandy Hook. But now it's time to get on to the Sandy Hook count circle. And so we're to the butterfly part finally. So I'm going to go over the areas that we cover, and then I'm going to go back over those and tell you what we find in each place. So the places that have been covered over the years, and the first butterfly count I went on was like 2007, and this had been going on for years and years already. So we meet at Guardian Park, um, which is down here where this road forks. There's a parking lot there, and we meet on the picnic tables. And then we start out from there. We go through the Battery Granger and Battery Potter roads and fields. There's a stand of hackberry trees back in that area. Um, and this set of sort of like triangular mess of roadways we call that the cinder road. It just seems to be covered with coal slag or something like that from way back. Hmm?
The birders call it the cold.
Okay, the coal road. Yeah. And then there's along between Hudson Drive and the bike path, which are here and here, there are some fields, some areas of fields that are pretty scruffy with very little vegetation. We'll go over those in a little bit. Tell you what we find there. There's the mast and the NOAA lab area. Not much to see there these days, but there are some stands of milkweed. So wherever there's milkweed, you have to take your chances at seeing what you can find. And then up in the North Beach area, there are all these lots and this little triangle here that is full of milkweed. So that's always a good possibility. There's a campsite, used to be called the Boy Scout Camp, but now they've opened it up to whoever wants to try to book a spot. And it's, if you're into camping, it's not very heavily booked in the summer when it's kind of unpleasant to try and sleep in the 75 or 80-degree weather. And then the gun battery with the ruined structures of Aerosmith there. Um, Very hard to get to these days because um, that area sometimes gets pretty badly flooded at high tide. And you can't always get out to that little spit, and the incursion of the salt water, you don't have very much in the way of nectar sources. So that's sort of like, well, if we can get there, we'll get there. If we can't, we don't, whatever. And then finally, there's the Spermaceti Cove used to be the visitor center until we had Hurricane Sandy, which really trashed the place. And now the only thing that's there are the parking lots, and there is a holly forest trail. And Sandy Hook is kind of interesting because the plants out there are all based on seeds that are dropped by birds. And so you have what ecologists refer to as an edaphic climax community holly forest, which means that normally holly would not be the most mature or climax community, but because of the fact that holly is a little bit more tolerant of the salt spray, and it is able to outcompete things like oaks and junipers. It ends up dominating, and so you can kind of walk a trail through uh, mostly holly trees with a few other things mixed in. So it's an interesting habitat for those of you who are kind of into um, flora and fauna and habitats. And if you happen to be out there in September, um, it can vary from year to year, but usually early to mid-September is when the beach plums ripen, and you can munch on a few beach plums while you're walking along the Holly Forest Trail. And part of what I like to do is, work with people who are novices at butterflying. So I worked with this park ranger, Michaela here, who she helped set up what they call a bio blitz. In 2024, we had 24 participants, part in the morning, part in the afternoon, and they helped us looking for butterflies or slowed us down depending on your depending on your uh, your opinion. But more eyes are always better because people see things and they're like, "What's this?" So it was good to have a lot of people there, and it was quite a crowd. We had a really good crowd that day. Um, so I have these books that I made up my own book that I bring out with me so that I can have people who don't know what they're looking at have a little something that they can use to try and help identify things. And so this is a couple of the pages in the book. I've got them here. You can kind of take a look at them if you want afterwards. But I tried to make comparisons of similar species so people could look at them and then get a more positive identification. Because when you're dealing with that many novices, well, did it look like this or this or this? And this coral hair streak has actually become pretty reliable at the Sandy Hook count. We have been getting those every year. They used to be a lot more scattered, and you would mainly only find them on a couple of we had some staghorn sumac out there that were flowering, and if you happen to find a flowering staghorn sumac, you usually had uh, a, a nice pair of coral hair streaks hanging out on that plant, and you could come back a half hour later, they would still be there. So that was pretty good. So I wanted to just go over what you might expect to find at each of these places. So while we're hanging out, waiting for everybody to show up at 10 o'clock, there is the yellow um, oval there is circling an English privet. And the English privet now is probably over 100 years old. So it is in bad shape. It is getting quite decrepit, and parts of it have fallen over, and parts of it have no more foliage on them. But there are still some parts that are flowering and are healthy enough that it draws some butterflies. And um, we used to have a lot more butterflies showing up, more species diversity and abundance numbers before Hurricane Sandy, but Hurricane Sandy kind of devastated a lot of the habitat with salt water, and so I think there's a slow recovery going on, but that would be purely anecdotal based on these trips. But there was a low point a few years after Hurricane Sandy, a couple of years afterwards, where we didn't see much of anything apart from the stalwart regulars. Um, but at the privet, you will usually see at pretty much everywhere that I mentioned will have cabbage whites. But apart from that, we would have red admirals and silver spotted skippers. Occasionally snouts if it's a good year um, for their hatching time or whatever you want to call it. But when they come out of their pupas and start spreading out, they usually show up at Sandy Hook uh, a short while after that. And if you happen to have a good year for the snouts, you'll find snouts on Sandy Hook. So that's kind of not really dependent on Sandy Hook itself, but dependent on wherever the snouts are coming in from. A couple of times we've seen broad-winged skippers here on this on the privet, and once We had a hackberry emperor there. That's not their favorite hangout, but showed up, put in a cameo appearance for us. So through Fort Hancock, a lot of these trails, the bike path and the coal road or the cinder road, whatever you want to call it, these can be kind of nice places for eastern-tailed blues. You can find American coppers there, and there is at least one or there's at least one, maybe two flowering butterfly weeds, and I happened to catch a coral hair streak on one of those last year. And so there's not a whole lot of butterflies, but you get a pretty good uh, regular set of visitors to this area. So we make sure we cover this area. Um, these areas here in the ovals are frequented by eastern-tailed blues. And oftentimes, now the last couple years I haven't seen them there, but oftentimes and almost every other year, there have been some swarthy skippers in there in quite a fair abundance. And so I don't know whether that is just due to the seasonality of their brood, or whether that is indicative of something's gone wrong for them in their in this habitat. But they had been a regular there for many years. And you will also, this is a good place for finding the coral hair streaks. You will almost always find coral hair streaks for some reason hanging out in these open areas with oh there's not much in the way of nectar sources there, interestingly enough, but they still show up. There's some hare's foot clover, and when I get beyond that, it's pretty sparse out there. But you still have them. You still have them showing up. So let's see. Like I said before, the mast and the NOAA lab area, around the edges of the parking lot and along the edges of the roadway, there are some stands of milkweed. So if we stick to those areas, we'll oftentimes see monarchs. We had snouts, cabbage whites, of course, some orange sulfurs, eastern-tailed blues. In the past, we had question marks showing up there. And recently, the Buckeyes seem to have come in, and they like the sandy edges along the road margin. So we'll oftentimes see a Buckeye or two. And then we go to the lots J, K, L, and M lots, all stacked up in a row there. And the area of trees and foliage in here, back in behind those lots. There are also some bare spots in there. And same, with the other bare spots, you might find some beach heather in there in the flat ground where it's pretty sparse, nothing else much grows. But every once in a while, you'll see a whole cluster of eastern-tailed blues or American coppers back in there. This grassy area here in this parking lot, which they don't really park cars in there anymore, but they mow it like once a year, so it's fairly good because it has some milkweed patches in it. And so you'll get quite a few butterflies out there. Very, very common to find orange sulfurs and monarchs there. Of course, American coppers are all around that area. They seem to like to hang out in the open spaces and along the roadway where there are no cars, where, it's walking back to the observation deck. And so you'll find quite a few of those uh, inhabiting that area. And then one of my favorite spots, of course, is this little triangle down here across the street from Lot J. It's just full of milkweed. And I'm like, come on, where are the butterflies? Because with that much milkweed, it's like a dense stand of milkweed. The entire thing is pretty much covered in milkweed. And, I'm thinking like this could support 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 butterflies. And I see maybe 2 to 10, but yeah, always have to check that because that has so much potential. If they ever do make it back, that's going to be a crowded hangout spot. And then the campsite and Battery Aerosmith, really among all the stuff in those areas, the one place that still holds some possibility is way at the back. You have to come in from the road, walk down, and walk along this road to the very end. There's an abandoned, sort of semi-dangerous red metal building that's kind of maroon colored, painted, and unsafe to go in. But to the left of that building is a stand of milkweed, and that has been very regular in the last few years for American ladies and monarchs and some cabbage whites, of course. And we had a broadwing skipper back there in 2024. And finally, we have the Spermaceti Cove life-saving station and the trails back into the holly forest. This parking lot adjacent, the edges of this parking lot here, just north of the place where you actually park for the life-saving station. I have observed some red admirals in there over the last couple of years. But if you're going to check for red admirals there, make sure you bring your binoculars because they are flying all over the place, and trying to get them to sit still is a challenge. And I think that pretty much covers it, except Tatum Park and Deep Cut Gardens, which I have been very little familiar with. And in past years, others have been kind of responsible for this. Now, I understand that you can find harvesters out there, but I have never had any luck at that because I really don't know exactly where to look. So if any of you want to come along on the trip,
I think they've been there in recent years.
no, oh, that's too bad. Anyway, I would really appreciate some help on this year's trip if anybody wants to come and help lead that. And I usually like to go out about a week or so before, weather dependent, and just take a day to scout out the area. This year I may take 2 days and scout, one in Sandy Hook and one in Tatum and Deep Cut. So if anybody wants to join me on those or meet me there or whatever, just shoot me an email, let me know, and I'll keep you posted as to what my plans are. And we do the actual Sandy Hook trip on the last Thursday in June. Thursday being a day where you don't have to wait an hour to get on the hook. So mostly those who join are usually retired. I used to take a day off work. I'm like, "Oh, this is my butterfly day. I'm out of here," and I would join in. But most of those of us who are from the Butterfly Club group are all retired, and Thursday is the same as any other day for some of us. So that's pretty much it. Are any questions? Yeah.
Well, this is with respect to the deer. Someone, I think, when I was on a birding trip, someone had mentioned that the deer were not there pre-Sandy, that it's a post-Sandy thing. Is that?
No, I mean, I think that post Sandy, the deer are probably more abundant, but I've seen them out there. They, the southern half of Sandy Hook, prior to closing down the, in 74, when they closed down the military installation, it was a state park. So New Jersey ran the southern part of Sandy Hook up until then, and then they turned that over to the National Park Service. So the National Park Service has the whole thing now. But I've been going out there since the 1970s, and I never fail to see deer if I'm looking for them. But I do think there are more now than there were, yes.
Yeah, destroyed the understory out there.
I'm sorry, what?
They've destroyed the understory. I've been going there for 30 years. The
Mm.
understory is gone. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, they're thriving, that's for sure. Go ahead.
Do they charge you admission? Because during the summer they usually do.
If you are going to use the popular parking lots, they charge you admission. If you are coming out for the butterfly trip, just tell them I'm coming out for the butterfly trip. I'm going out to Fort Hancock. If you're not using the beach parking, no charge. So you can go pretty much anywhere in the Fort Hancock area and park out there for free. And if you are a senior, you're half price. Or maybe it's if you're a senior who has the National Parks card. I'm not sure about that. I think it's if you have the National Parks card, it's half price. But they don't charge you unless you're using the popular beach lots. So you can always go out there and not have to pay. Yes.
What you said about the coral hair streaks in the field with no nectar, it sounds like a place the way that I find them, very low growing vegetation. And it's really a display ground. If you watch them carefully, it'll be males perching.
Okay.
So typical hair.
Yes, yeah, that is true.
The milkweed nearby that field.
Is there are little patches of milkweed, yeah. So yeah, they could,
Okay.
yeah, that's a good point. For anybody who might be listening to this, Sharon said that she sees the hair streaks perching, especially the males, as a display, and they fly up and do Mortal Kombat in the air. And so every once in a while they'll take a break nearby for a milkweed break, and there's plenty of milkweed all over Sandy Hook. But yeah, that's a good observation because you do see that behavior quite a bit. Yeah. Anything else?
You ever do, have any luck with Henry's elephants anymore on Sandy Hook?
We did see a couple last year in April. We did a trip, and they were sparse.
They used to be more abundant, but since Sandy, they're really can be hard to find.
Yeah, the Hurricane Sandy, there was a lot of saltwater intrusion into the low-lying areas of Sandy Hook, and that killed off a lot of plants that rely on fresh water, or at least brackish water. Full salt water was pretty rough on them, and I think that took out a lot of the species diversity. There were a lot more species on Sandy Hook before 2012 when the hurricane hit. I did notice last year. I forgot to mention. Let's see if I can go back here. to this one. There is a little area up
Should
here,
put your face on it if you vote on
crazy
it.
looking pathway. There's a pathway that goes to the dune that overlooks the freshwater marsh. And that little pathway has a stand of milkweed right in the middle of it. And so if you walk along there, you never know what you're going to see, but you will find some butterflies back in there. Just so happened when I walked that path that I saw a question mark for the first time since Hurricane Sandy along that path. So that was a heartening observation. So
So I have a
uh,
question this is from Zoom. I have a question.
okay.
There hasn't been any mention of elfins. I assume it's because elfins aren't usually out during the count period. But
That's right.
what about the elfins at Sandy Hook? Are they still there? Can you see
Uh,
them?
you would have to go there in April probably to see them, and they are greatly diminished from what they once were. But we did get a couple of them last year in April when we went out there,
It's about Juniper Hair Street.
and we also
Early,
had
early,
yes, we also. I'm sorry, what was that?
early or late April?
We were there on April 25th, so they probably
Okay.
were there earlier than that. We maybe caught the tail end, or
Once this cold weather will have an effect on it. They'll be later this year. My opinion.
okay. Chris says they'll be probably later this year than last year because of the cold weather that we're having now. So probably late April to early May. Maybe early May is the best bet. Um, And we did have a couple of juniper hair streaks out there last year in the April trip, and they were on the Euphorbia spurge. It was about the only nectar source that was out there at that time of the year, and so there was one little cluster of those critters hanging out. And nectaring on the spurge. And so we did have a few. And I did a week before the 25th trip. I picked a day that looked like it would be tolerable, and I did a trip out there, and I saw some of them out there then. So late April, they were out, and we happened to catch a couple in the camera.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Well,
To ask an unrelated question, have you or anybody else seen either along the there or on New York areas any prickly pear cactus with red centers? 40 years ago, I picked up some cactus someplace, and they had along the shore. They had red centers, and I've not been able to find them again anywhere. Nor has anybody else I've talked to who might
yeah,
have seen them.
I've only seen them with whitish yellow centers. Anybody else? No. You
No
are
takers.
no takers. You are alone in having seen that.
I don't know where I got them. I had to get them in New Jersey or New York. That's the only places I was, and I can't
Okay.
I can't refine them.
Yeah, I haven't seen them.
This was very nice. I like the history also.
Oh, well, thank you.
So what's the oldest lighthouse in the world?
The oldest lighthouse in the world. All right. I was like, yeah, so what is the oldest lighthouse in the world? There is a lighthouse in Ireland, and I can't remember the name of it, but it has been constantly in use for 800 years. We got a ways to go to catch up. 800 years.
You can never catch up because by the time you get there, it'll be 1600 years.
Well, all we have to do is have it not be lit one night. And then maybe we could catch up in another 600 years. to be the longest, oldest continuously operating lighthouse anyway. It's still a pretty cool lighthouse. And there are certain times where you can actually go out there and climb up to the top if you have the stamina.
Since we're talking about lighthouses, I noticed that the circle area for the count included Roman shoals. Has anybody ever spotted a butterfly on Roman shoals?
I don't think anybody's ever gone out here during the count.
Yeah, I'm a little short of a boat, and I don't think there are too many nectar sources out there sitting on top of a rock. But there is an interesting story. I don't know if you've heard that there's twin lights in Highlands up above Sandy Hook. There's a little plaque there. If you go up there that says, this is the place where Marconi did the first radio broadcast to a ship in Sandy Hook Bay. So the first radio communication was initiated from twin lights.
Is that the place, or maybe another place which is like the highest point along the Atlantic seaboard,
That's right, yes.
other than Maine, I guess, or
It's the highest point. It's a sandstone formation, and it's the highest point of the non-rocky shore at any case, along the East Coast from wherever I think the rocky shore ends somewhere around Connecticut or north of Long Island up there, and all the way down to Florida. That's the highest point along the seaboard. And then they have the two lighthouse up there, twin lights.
it's a nice park.
Yes, it's a park and a museum. Yeah, yeah, kind of a cool place. Okay.
Thank you, Henry.
Well done, very good.